Okay, so once you finish your intro and your background, you have about 4 to 5 pages written. No more than that. No more than that, especially in a 20-page paper. And to be honest with you, I think for most of you, I think you're looking at 3 to 4 pages for those two sections. But I'm not going to it's not like Chip and I like just pour over those and make sure that there's a page limit. Just trying to give you a general idea about how these things work. But once you get your background and intro written, or do it in the proper order, intro and background, then you move to the narrative section of the paper or the body of the paper. And that's by far the largest part of your paper. It's the body part, the narrative part, same thing. Um, so you let your reader know what your topic is, what your argument is, what your roadmap is, what they're going to see. You've oriented your reader in your intro. You've contextualized your topic. You tell your reader very briefly how we got to this point. You have to give your reader just a touch of background, no more than that, just a touch of background. Then you move into the heart of the paper, which is the narrative section. Um, and the point of that section is to present your argument in an organized fashion. And you want to think, what are the major points that you want to make in this section of your paper that prove the argument that you've presented up front? Okay. So, what are the things that you want to talk about? What's the evidence that you want to present in the body of your paper that demonstrates that the argument that you've put up front is in fact correct? And again, think of yourself a little bit as a lawyer. You've made an argument, and now you're trying to defend that argument. So what you want to do is you want to take all the research that you've done and you want to organize it in such a way that it proves the argument that you've made in your introduction, and it adds detail to the story that you're telling as well. Okay, so basically, what the research section is about is, what are you going to talk about? What's the evidence you're going to talk about? And in what order are you going to talk about it? Okay, so let me just say that again. What's the evidence that you're going to talk about? What are the points that you want to make? And in what order are you going to talk about that evidence and the points that you want to make? Okay, so that's what you have to start thinking about. I'm going to make point A, point B, point C, and here's the evidence for point A, point B, and point C. So for each of these sections, and for narrative sections, I would say in a 20-page paper, probably you'll have 3 to 5 narrative sections. Okay, you'll be making 3 to 5 points uh, uh, about your topic. You're going to be presenting 3 to 5 bits of evidence about your topic that proves the argument that you've made up front. So each narrative section is, think of it as about between 2 and 4 pages. I think many of you will be surprised that 20 pages is a lot shorter than you think when it comes to writing a paper. For some of you, it may seem kind of daunting, but if you kind of break it down, you can start to see how things add up, how the pages add up. So, so for each of the sections where you're presenting your evidence in a logical way that supports the argument that you made up front, you need a topic sentence where you're saying that this bit of evidence that I'm going to talk about, this is the point I'm making here. This is the bit of evidence that I'm presenting here, and here's how it supports my argument. Then you actually want to present the evidence itself, And that's where you start presenting your primary quotes, your secondary quotes, all the juicy stuff that you've gotten from your research. That's where you want to start presenting that. That's where you want to put it in your paper. And let me say, one of the great kind of ways of thinking about writing is show, don't tell. If you've got a great bit of evidence about your topic, don't paraphrase it. Just put it in if you have a bit of primary evidence. Just put it in your paper. Primary evidence is always the most persuasive thing, or even if you're quoting from secondary evidence. Um, you have to paraphrase some, but try one of the things when we're grading your papers is I want to see that you've looked at primary evidence. I want to see that you've really done research on this topic. And I want to see you present your primary evidence in the body of your paper. I want to look at it. Okay. So, topic sentence, what's the point that you're making here? Then in the next, your task is to put in your evidence, your research, same thing. Then to briefly analyze this evidence, and then you transition to the next point that you're going to make. Okay. So for each narrative sections, and again, there's for you all in this paper, there's 3 to 5 or so narrative sections of your paper. And that what you're doing is you're supporting the argument that you've made by making specific points backed up by the research that you've done. You're presenting the evidence. So each narrative section, you have a couple of tasks to fulfill. You have a quick topic sentence, just letting your reader know what they're going to see in this section. The heart of each of these sections is the evidence slash research that you've done, that you weave in narratively into the section. You analyze that evidence as well. And often I have them split up between B and C, evidence research analysis. Basically, actually, they're usually intertwined in the narrative. And then you transition to the next point that you're going to make. Okay. So those are it. And the transition to the next point is usually very, very, it's just a really quick sentence where you're basically saying, well, I've talked about this bit of evidence. Now I'm going to make another point. And that's basically what you're saying. So here on this outline that I'm going to send you and that I'm looking at as I record this Zoom, I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3 narrative sections, 4 narrative sections. And that's probably in the ballpark of how many narrative sections that you will have in your paper. Okay, so again, the narrative section, the topic sentence is what is that section going to talk about? How is it supporting your overall argument? The presenting of your research, primary and secondary, quote freely from primary evidence. And also if there's a bit of secondary evidence that you found, you can also quote from that as well. So it's presentation of evidence. At the same time, you're analyzing what you're finding, and you're also tying what you're finding to your overall argument that you've presented up front in your paper. And then a quick sentence where you transition to the next narrative section. So these narrative sections, these are the body of your paper. This is the longest part of your paper. But think about there definitely is a logic to this this format. So with your intro, to go back to that, it's like, oh, this is my topic, this is my argument. This is the roadmap that I'm going to take to prove my argument. Background, very, very quick, very brief, contextualizing. This is how we get to this point. This is what happened that leads us to here. And you just have to do that in really quick summary form. And then beginning in the third section of the paper, the body of the paper, you start, your roadmap starts taking shape. You talk about, you make one point and that supports your overall argument, and then you support that with evidence that you analyze. Then you move on to the second big point that you're going to make in the roadmap. You present your evidence, you analyze it, and then you're always transitioning as you go from one point to the second big point, to the third, to the fourth, to the fifth, whatever. And remember, each of these narrative sections, ballpark 2 to 4 pages. Now, for some of you, there might be narrative sections that are longer than other sections. That's one of the things we'll talk about as you actually start doing your draft. Some narrative sections will be shorter than others. It kind of just really depends on your evidence and how much evidence that you have. But for now, I just want you to start thinking about, what is the order that you're going to present your evidence in? What's the evidence you're going to present to support your argument? And what's the order you're going to present it in? Okay, so I just want you to start thinking about the structure of your paper now, because pretty soon you're going to have to start writing it. Okay, then the conclusion. The conclusion is, you have to finish strong. One of the things that you've probably heard ever since you were a youngster is, papers are, tell them what you're going to tell them it, and then tell them what you told them. Actually, there's a lot of truth to that. So in your conclusion, you basically want to restate your argument, and you want to do a summary of your main points. You're pulling all your the body of the paper. You're summarizing them, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then tell your reader that you've proven the argument that you've made up front. So what your conclusion is about, it's about you kind of taking a victory lap, in a way, that you restate your thesis, you restate the evidence that you have presented, and you say, you're telling your reader, so based on what you've seen, I have proven the point. I have proven the argument that I have made in the, I have proven the argument that I made at the beginning of the paper.